Alright, in this lesson we're going to make a map of the Salem College campus. What we want to do is, what I've added so far is just the downloaded shape file of the Farmington roads. We'll add those to the map as well. But I also want the building footprints, and so to make the map I want to add the building footprints to the campus. So I have that in my campus map folder already, and I'll add it to the map. Can't really see them, but if I zoom in on the campus, I see the buildings right here. I'm thinking this isn't all the buildings, and so most of this lesson is going to be about editing. We're going to split this huge building into its pieces. This would be considered the central classroom complex. This would be the West Classroom, Student Center, Henderson Fine Arts. So we can split that polygon up, edit some of these other buildings that have been added on to, and some other things, some other buildings around there. But how do I know where they are? I need some imagery. We've added our imagery layer. If you don't remember how to do that, I'll do that real quick. If you go to Insert and Connections and a WMS server, we can insert the URL from the county's website, which happens to be sjcounty.net, and under government there's a geographic info systems at the bottom, and then scrolling down we can get to our WMS services. This is just a PDF file basically, and we can copy this link address and jump back to our map, paste it into the server URL, and OK that. I've already added it to the map, and you should get basically what you see here. And so we can see some buildings that have been added since the city had added this building footprints layer. So there's lots of parts of buildings that have been added on, been extended, a bunch of additions. So we're going to edit some of this stuff. All right. Probably the best way to work on this is to not mess up the original layer, so I'd like to add that to my campus map geodatabase that has nothing in it now. So the building footprints, it has a good coordinate system also that's all ready for, it matches up with the imagery pretty well. So I'm going to import this into my geodatabase first, so my editing can happen on that layer. With it in the map, I should be able to pull this list down and just pick the building footprints, and I just call this SJC buildings now. And the environments, I'll just pick the coordinate system that it's supposed to be and run it. Okay, one of the purposes of doing this is in my catalog pane. Now I have my buildings. I might want to do this with the roads as well. So let's just add the roads here. It's always nice to have a single geodatabase holding the features. So let's do the roads, and just call this SJC roads. Same coordinate system, and run it. Alright, I don't need to mess with the roads too much right now, so I'll go ahead and turn those off. Back to my catalog. So now I have the roads and the buildings. I can turn off the building footprints, and I just have, in fact, remove them from the map, since they're basically copies, but now I'm working on the geodatabase feature classes instead of the shapefiles downloaded from the city. Okay, let's look at editing some of these buildings, just adding. I'll start with the small one, maybe the health sciences building here. Let that refresh. So in the Edit ribbon, I want to draw around this, so I can click on the Create tool, and it lists the layers that I can draw on. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing roads here. Oh, because it's turned off. That's okay. So I'll start with the polygon here, but really all these edges have right angles on them, so the right angle polygon tool actually looks pretty good. I have some other tools in the once I start drawing, these tools are available, like arcs and just straight lines and things. So I'll just pick an edge, a nice long edge. That has too many dips in it. So maybe just this edge across the top here. So I'll try to draw that across. And now I can see it's at a right angle. Let the imagery refresh. And I'll just draw around the building. Usually I try to look for the bottom corners where I actually see them touching the ground, but in this case I don't have a lot of yeah, I probably didn't need to be that enough. Now I have this vertex that I clicked that I didn't quite see. I'm adding points here, and I didn't really like that one, so I'm going to hover over it, and I can stretch that out to this corner, and maybe move. I just clicked another one, so hover and let the cursor change. Now I have too many vertices, so I can hover over it, right click, and delete vertex, and that kind of steps me back. I can move this back into place. So as I'm drawing, I can move these vertices into place. Oops, these are switched. There we go. So you can move, remove, and draw vertices with this tool. Really like the right angle tool. It's very helpful. Obviously we're not super concerned with accuracy, but want it to match the image anyway well enough. This looks like it has a dip in it, so I'm going to have to get away from my right angle tool and just pick a regular line and follow the line to another corner. Then maybe I can turn my right angle tool back on. You also notice as I draw, the layer is semi-transparent, so I can see underneath the polygon where I'm drawing. Sometimes it needs to be a little more transparent, so under the view, no, the appearance panel, I can make that transparency just a little more see-through as I get around these corners. So I'm kind of assuming the bottom of the building is just a little bit underneath. Just because of the imagery. Could move that out of the way a little bit. Almost back to where I started to complete the building. To complete it, I can hit F2 on the keyboard. I'm not quite there yet. This foyer atrium, outdoor atrium, to build. I think that'll probably do it now that I see that the shape is more or less there. F2 on the keyboard, or click on the green triangle, green checkbox I mean, and it commits that change. Okay, this is not saved, but the drawing has been completed. So I need to go to my edit ribbon and save that change, save the edits. And so now that building footprint has been added to the overall building footprints. One other thing that makes the editing and drawing a little bit better is I have all the buildings in Farmington in this layer, and I don't want all of these layers. I don't want all these building footprints in here. So I'm just going to use the select tool, maybe the lasso tool, and just make sure I draw around all the buildings. There's no building up there. Maybe there's some buildings down here. So here are all the buildings on the campus that are already there. There's some that I need to draw still. But what I'd like to do is switch the selection. I can't do that in the options, but I can do it in the attribute table. Dock that up here. Okay, so I have, down at the bottom I can see I have 21 out of 18,210 buildings selected. So what I'd like to do is switch that selection, or Control U. I guess I could have done that on the screen. So Control U selects everything else. Let's see if it works on the map. Apparently not. Maybe it only works in the table. Anyway, with all the other buildings selected, I can delete them with the delete key on the keyboard. Now, let me turn off the imagery. Let's undo that deletion. Maybe those were selected also. Okay, I must have just deleted the buildings here, so let's try this again. Zoom out just a little bit, and turn off this layer. just to make it easier to see. So here are the San Juan College buildings. Let's try to Control U. Okay, it only works in the attribute table. So in here, let's try to Control U. There we have all the other buildings selected, and I'm just going to delete them inside the table here. So delete selected. This may take a second. Okay, I'll close that. So now I have only the San Juan College buildings left. Now the editing, it'll just make it faster to redraw, and it's fewer buildings to worry about, so smaller file sizes and things. Okay, so as far as drawing them goes, I want to go over maybe this the gym, because it has some circular features. It has some arcs and things. So let's go over that building. I'll start on the left side here. So again, edit, create, and buildings. I'm just going to use the regular polygon tool because not all these edges are right edges. So it would be nice to start on an edge that I can see the bottom, and that might be a good one. So I'll draw to this corner of this arc, and it would be nice to draw this entire arc if I could. So I'm going to use the 3-point arc tool. Basically, all I got to do is pick another point on the arc, and then the end point, and that looks good enough. Okay, now as far as the rest of this goes, I'm going to draw these as separate objects. Go back to my line tool and just continue drawing this footprint. Speed it up here. Adding vertices as I go. At this point now I have a long edge here, so maybe I can go to my right angle tool and get some of these corners in quickly. A lot of right angles on this side of the building. I think it changes when I get to the other side. Yeah, at this point I need to go to the regular edge. I think I have some right angles now again. These edges are hidden under the roof line. You can see where the imagery got stitched together, and they're just blurring the edge a little bit to show the building with multiple images. Okay, so here's where I'm going to get back to not right angles. Another arc. It's not easy enough. Just click on there. Final edge. Back to the roof. And square it off. And F2. Okay, here's the main part of the building. Now we have the Zia Conference Center, I think that's called. I see multiple shapes on this, so I'm going to actually just use a circle. Not sure how that circle is going to be drawn, but I can move it. Yeah, it's from the center, so I'm just going to hit escape. And I see the center pretty well right in the center there. So that circle, and then draw a rectangle for the square sides. Now the rectangle tool is a little weird, but you're going to click and drag or click and click and click. I think that's just a sidewalk there or something. So I have two shapes here for the actual Zia Conference Center, and then there's a breezeway or a connecting building part of the building. So I'm just going to draw that as another. So I can use snapping now, and I'm just going to draw it inside and not worry about the overlaps. Okay, so I have these shapes, and what I want to do here is just merge them together. So let me just use regular select tool. So I'm going to select and hold the shift key down, select the big building. Well, with no building selected, I select one building and then hold the shift key down and select the rest of these shapes. Then I can click on the merge tool, and it asks me which features to preserve or which attributes to preserve. Which feature has the attributes I want to preserve. I don't really care because they're all just newly drawn, so I'm just going to merge. So now that's all one piece. Okay. Here's a building that I want to let the imagery refresh, and I don't think this building's correct, so we're going to maybe use the reshape tool for this. Yeah, there's a couple buildings that don't. In fact, let's use this one first. So this building's already drawn, except it's not very good. So I can edit vertices. Maybe it just needs to be moved, but it's all connected in here, so I do want to edit the vertices and put. You can see where they drew the building and sort of didn't quite get that edge here, so I'm going to move, just click and drag on this edge and move it to where I see it. And this edge also, move that in. Click away from it. That looks pretty good. I'm going to edit the vertices, well, select with the Edit Vertices tool. And now this edge is actually an arc. So I'm going to right click on it and change the segment to a circular arc. Now it bends whichever way it wants to, but I can just click and drag it, and now I can drag it as an arc. And just try to follow the bottom edge of the building. Okay, let's commit that change. I also want to reshape this particular part of the building because it has this overhang, and maybe I want to add that, let's say. So I'm just going to I'm going to click inside and just follow the edges of this overhang, and then F2, and then that redraws and adds that little shape to it. So instead of merging a shape, it kind of does that all in one step. Just draw the shape that you want to add to it. Okay, here's another part that probably needs a little attention. Okay, I think this whole building needs to be moved, so let's select it just to be sure, and we'll use the move tool, and we'll just try to line up the edges. Doesn't look too good. Yeah. It may be a good idea to edit the vertices on this thing. And just kind of redraw some of these edges. Just move the vertices around. I'm not going to worry about this arc right now. Just try to get the corners of the building in shape. Let's go ahead and F2 that, or click on that edge. Okay, now this edge, well, let's go back to edit vertices on this. It has a bunch of vertices here. Instead of having a nice circular arc, it's just a bunch of vertices, and I don't want to have to move every one of them. So how about I'm going to select, oops, hold the Shift key. Let's try it again. There. Selected all the vertices. I'm just going to delete them. That makes a straight line, and now I can check that line and change it to a circular arc and move it into position. F2. Okay, that helped. Then there's some buildings to connect here. Before I go too far, and I'll add on to that building with the reshape tool. But there's actually 4 or 5 buildings here, and so I'm going to use the split tool to take care of those. So I'll use my select tool, select this large building, and use the split tool. And all I need to do is just draw where I want it to split. I'm going to just cut from this vertex across just the edge here, and F2. So now I've split this giant polygon into, well, 2 different buildings anyway. And then this West Classroom Complex, this is actually a breezeway under here, so I'm just going to cut that across. I still have the split tool on, so split and follow the edge, F2. Okay, all this is the student center. Takes a step. I'm not sure where it goes, but there's a tree there, so perhaps this could, yeah, maybe to here and here, F2. Okay, last one, the Henderson Fine Arts Center. I'll just follow the roof line here and maybe just cut it across. There we go. Took a minute. And just sort of line that up. If I need to, I can edit that vertex. Let's make that a little more square. It's snapping to itself, so I can turn the snapping off or zoom in. Cancel that. I'm still on the split tool, so let it redraw. Looks good enough. Okay, so now I have these buildings cut into their separate pieces using the split tool. The split tool will stay split tool unless you change it, so I usually just pick the select tool. Okay, that's generally the idea of editing these buildings. I have the only other thing we did was add the roads, select just the roads that cross the campus. So let's go ahead and turn those on. And I'm going to maybe turn off the imagery so you can see the roads. So I don't need all the roads in Farmington, but there's the energy building I haven't drawn up here yet. But let's go ahead and select just the roads around the campus. Now I'm going to select buildings too, so how about I clear that selection, and I can right click on roads and go to selection and make this the only selectable layer for now. And now when I select the roads, maybe I want to pick the outside roads here, and these are basically the only roads I need to include in my map. So I could switch the selection, go to the attribute table, and delete. So now I have a cleaner map here, and then I can finish editing the roads. I also want to, as I draw and as I make these roads, or the buildings, going back to the buildings, so now the roads are the only selectable layer, so I can change that in the list by selection, and I can edit some of these, so I can add buildings to that selectable layer, and go back to list. And so now when I click on a building, I should be able to select the building. So with that building selected, or with a building selected, such as this one I just drew, the Health Sciences building, I want to edit its attributes, right? So I go to the attributes, and I don't really have a column in which, square feet, that's actually just a number. Some of these other layers could be text, like the ID maybe, so none of these are actually text. So I'm going to add, well, let's save the edits here before I forget. I want to add a column to the attribute table so I can edit the names of these buildings. So I'm going to add a name field, and so I go to the attribute table. I don't need anything selected right now. I'm going to add, I'll just name this name, tab across, text. I want that, it's very important that the data type matches what you want to type in, so names are usually text. And I'll tab over to the length of it, and I'm just going to put 50 for the length. That's how many characters that field should hold. That way it's not too many. And then I'll save that. So that's sort of like saving an edit, but that's adding a field or a column to my attribute table. And close that after I've saved it. And now I have this name field. So when I want to select a building, such as my Health Sciences building, and I go to the attributes pane, I can see the columns in the table listed as rows, and now I can type in Health Sciences, right? And with auto apply on, I can just hit enter, and the apply button basically flashes, automatically applying that name to the building. So if I want to label these buildings based on their names, let me edit this first, or save the edits. So I have my buildings and labeling. Right now it's on field ID, and if I label them, I might see the ID number of each building. This new one I drew doesn't have one, or neither does this. But if I change the layer, the field to name, then I can see the different names popping up. let's see, HHPC, or I could do Health and Human Performance Center, but that's less than 50 characters still. Educational Services Building, and so forth. So this is how I would start my map. And then after we're done, we can symbolize our different features. These buildings might need to be colored differently to make the map look more appealing. So let's take a look at that. So remember, in the edits, when I change the name, I have to save that to make sure those are done. So I think I have another layer where I've actually completed these buildings, so I don't have to do all this in this lesson to show you. Let's see, I have these SJC buildings. I'm going to add this layer and turn off that layer. So now I have them all layered, and they're colored by just a single symbol, right? So with the buildings, I can go to Appearance and Symbology and Unique Values, which gives the buildings a unique value based on, well, maybe the ID field, but none of these buildings have an ID field, or maybe the ID is the same or something. But if I go to Name, then it attaches color for every name. So some of the colors are kind of close to each other, so I can pick a different color scheme, maybe a brighter color. Well, that's kind of a darker bright. So that looks okay. If I have too many blues next to each other, maybe I could individually, let's see, Central Classroom Complex. Maybe I could change that color to, let's go to the properties. So if I click on the swatch, I can go over to the symbology and click on properties and just edit the color myself. I don't see very many, maybe a slightly darker yellow. There, that brightened that up. Too many greens, maybe. Well, that's okay. Maybe the physical plant should have, looks alphabetical, so here's color there, so just change that to maybe a blue, dark blue, maybe not that dark. Okay, so now I have the different labels on the different buildings. I can do the same thing with roads. These roads should have a name on them, so let's just see. Open up the attribute table. And road name includes the suffix of it, so that would be a good one to label. So on the roads, my labeling, and instead of name, let's go with road name. And turn them on. It's not looking that great, but if I use like European streets or a basic line symbol, it should follow the curvature at least a little tighter to the actual road. Okay, maybe the symbology on the road could be a little, I'm going to use a very light gray and maybe a 5-point. That way the roads may stand out when I turn the imagery back on. That's what I was after. Another problem that I'm going to see is this black text on an aerial image usually doesn't look all that great. It's a little harder to read now. So a couple things you can do with the labeling. So I'm on roads and labeling. Here's the text symbol. If I click on the properties for that text symbol, there's a halo option. So maybe I could make it a light white fill with 50% transparency. Let's see what that looks like. So it gives us faint outline to the text and makes it a lot easier to read. And I may want that for my building text also, so let's try that. Okay, so even if the color of the building is a little bit darker than usual, that outline that I can put on the text makes it a little better. So there I go, laying out the rest of the map um, would be the next step. So one more check to double check I've saved all my edits. Now I'm ready to insert a new layout. I'll use either a portrait or a landscape, maybe, well, I have that energy building up there, so maybe portrait. So here's a new layout. I'm going to add a map frame at the current extent, and we can change the zoom level or the scale of the map, basically. So that doesn't quite fit on there. If I try to pan, it pans the paper. So what we need to do is, one thing to do is I can activate it. Now when I start panning, it may be a good idea to turn off the imagery again. And so I'm just going to get, I can pan and zoom, get the buildings back in. I think there's a building down here, so maybe I'll, yep, there's, this may be better in portrait. So at that zoom level, I'll just come back out and want to edit the whole map frame. Go to its properties by right click and placement, display, constraint, map frame. Where is it? I should be able to change its orientation. And oh, this is just the map frame. I don't want to change that. I want to change the layout itself. So where do I do that? Can't float that. Somewhere in this layout I can adjust. Let's look at the layout properties here. There we go. Layout properties and landscape. Thank you. Okay, I see the lower left corner matching the map frame, but I need the upper right corner too as well. And then give it some margin so it'll print. I need to activate the frame again so that I can pan and get all the buildings in there. So here's a nice layout, and then we'll add, let me get back out of layout, just go back, and I can insert the north arrow just like we did in the other maps, and I'll stop here. Good labeling, good layout, orientation, landscape in this case, adding north arrows, scales, legends. That was all done in the previous map as well, so that should do it.